Pat, I'm Armen Keteyian,
yes,
from CBS News in New York. Was Adrian Gilliam a suspect in this case, and if so, why was he eliminated?
I think early on, anytime you have an investigation like this, you look at many potential suspects, he being one of them. I think it'd be ridiculous not to look at him initially on, as well as many other people connected to the people involved, and he was one of the persons we looked at, yes.
And why was he eliminated as a suspect? What was it that...
Well, he was eliminated based on our investigation. Our investigation determined clearly that we were looking at a murder-suicide, not a double homicide made to look like a murder-suicide. It'd be very difficult to emulate something like that if you didn't know what you were doing. Once we got to the crime scene, once we were able to establish that we were looking at a potential murder-suicide, we were able to reconstruct the scene basically through ballistic science and trajectory of the rounds and whatnot. It was pretty clear to us that she was seated in a particular location when she fired the shot that killed herself, and when she slid down on Steve McNair's lap. All of that was consistent with the evidence, and nothing to suggest there was a third person in there who may have shot the two of them and then staged it to look like a double homicide. Did we think initially that it could be a double homicide? Certainly we did. But once we got into it, we were able to determine that's not what it was. It was actually a murder-suicide. There were other persons who had interest in Miss Qasimi. Absolutely there was. Persons that were maybe jealous. I mean, some of that is possible, of course, but nothing along the lines of going to go in there, kill the two people, and oh, by the way, let's make it look like a murder-suicide. Very difficult to do, and we don't believe that happened.
As far as the science is concerned, you had no fingerprints on the gun. There's no gunshot residue on her hands. There is nothing literally that ties her to the murder weapon other than what you found at the crime scene. What was it at the crime scene that tipped it?
Right, I would say that's incorrect about no gunshot residue. Her left hand did reflect some gunshot residue, although there was not enough to conclusively say that. The TBI did place an addendum in their report that specifically said there was gunshot residue on her left hand, which would...
Excuse me, just for 1 second. Originally it was a verbal estimate by the TBI that there was gunshot residue on her left hand, but in the police summary, finally, that it was inconclusive that there was gunshot residue.
And that's the language that they use, inconclusive. But if you speak with the forensic scientists who did the examination, they'll tell you that there was evidence of gunshot residue on Miss Qasimi's left hand.
How do you explain the relationship between Adrian Gilliam Jr. and Miss Qasimi? Changed very differently from this happenstance casual relationship to 200 plus cell phone text messages. 49 text and cell phone messages.
I get all that. Yeah, nothing you're saying escapes me. I understand everything you're saying. But none of it has anything to do with the actual event that occurred. Was Mr. Gilliam trying to have a relationship with Ms. Qasimi? Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But was he the one that went in there and killed the two and then made it look like a murder-suicide? No. You have to look at Ms. Qasimi's history. Her history clearly showed that she was a woman in distress. And when this occurred, she made a comment to Mr. McNair just 2 days prior that pretty soon I'll have all of you. And he didn't understand the significance of that statement. But we think it's pretty significant when you add that with everything else that she did. Her emotional state during the time shortly before her death. She was, in our opinion, clearly spiraling out of control.
But I have talked to at least a dozen people that put her emotional state exactly the opposite of that.
I've probably talked to 1,000 people that have told me over the years that their loved one did not commit suicide. She or he was very happy. We spend more time arguing with family members who refuse to admit that their family member or loved one committed suicide. They would much rather believe that their loved one was murdered rather than have to explain a suicide.
Well, not just
and this is no different.
I spoke to the gentleman, Tony, who was her boss, who saw her that
Friday
night at 10 o'clock, who said that she wasn't upset, she wasn't angry, she wasn't out of control. In fact, she was exactly the opposite. She was sad about the fact that her roommate had left, but that was it. It wasn't that she was angry or emotionally distraught or irrational.
And I get that. We've also spoke to witnesses who have told us the exact opposite.
So as far as his cell phone records are concerned, he spoke to her at 12:02 a.m.
Correct.
For 3 minutes. Were you able to determine the substance of that call?
No, he was probably 18 miles away from the scene when he had that conversation. Probably the same, I think he sent her a text message, 1:25 a.m. or somewhere in that range on July the 4th, in addition to follow-up text messages later in the day on the 4th, probably 1:30 or so, and then maybe later that night. And he was always never in the downtown area, absolutely never in the downtown area, which would be typical if you're going to ping off a tower where the scene of the crime occurred. Closest he was probably 15 miles away.
At the time of the suspected murders,
Correct.
he was, are we still looking at 2 a.m. in the morning?
Right, approximately, yes.
So at about 1:30 on this text message on July 4th,
Right.
According to the cell phone towers and the
Right.
pings, he's about 18 miles.
Right, he's
away
in
at that
Laverne,
time.
Smyrna area. That's where the area he was in, where he was pinging off of, where he was basically most of that night.
Okay.